Okay, hi everyone. It's just past 7, so we're going to get going. I'm Marcy Larson. I am the VP of Marketing and Business Development at Illinois Holocaust Museum, and welcome to our One Book, One Museum book club. Helping me this evening will be Michelle Gatesy. She is a marketing coordinator and will be helping to make sure your hands are raised, that your questions are asked, whether your hands are raised or you're in the chat. So a quick note on logistics before I introduce today's moderator. This is a conversation we want everyone to participate, but there's many ways to participate in our Zoom book clubs. One way you might participate is to actually raise your hand on camera like this, and we'll get to you with a comment. The second way you can participate is to raise your hand via the participants button at the bottom. If you on the reactions bar, you can, wait, is it participants? Raise your hand. Where is it, Michelle? Help me.
It's under reactions with the little smiley face.
Yeah, but isn't there a raise your hand?
I'm pretty sure raising your hand is under reactions, right?
Okay, well, if you would like to participate, go into reactions and you can choose a clap, a thumbs up, or anything there, and we'll call on you.
I see Karen says it's next to participants.
On an iPad, it's under more and it says raise hand.
Yeah, I wonder, under more.
And then it says raise hand.
Okay, well, if you can find that, use that. Otherwise, physically raise your hand or use a reaction or put a question in the chat and we'll get your question answered. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderators for tonight. Phyllis Lassner. Phyllis is a professor emeritus in the Crown Center for Jewish and Israel Studies at Northwestern University. She has published widely on Holocaust literature and film and women writers of the 30s through the 70s. Her books about World War II and the Holocaust include British women writers of World War II, Anglo-Jewish women writing the Holocaust, and most recently, Espionage and Exile, Fascism and Anti-Fascism in British Spy Fiction and Film. She recently has co-edited a new edition of Gisela Pearl's memoir, I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz. Her current publications include essays on Polish post-Holocaust films and intermarriage in the Third Reich. She's lectured across the US, in Europe, and Israel. And she is the recipient of the International Diamond Jubilee Fellowship 2015 through 2017 at Southampton University in the UK. We are proud to say that she serves on the Education and Exhibition Committees at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and on the research of the Holocaust Education Foundation. Thank you, Phyllis, for joining us tonight and moderating the discussion of this book. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Marcy, for that lovely introduction, and thank everybody among the participants. And I see the number has hit 50, so thank you very much for attending this. And I hope that we will engage in a very lively conversation. I think I need to adjust my view. Okay. Am I full screen view? Because I see Marcy.
You are, however people have, this isn't a webinar, so you're set however people have their view.
Oh, okay.
Everyone can hear you.
Oh,
but most people want to see each other. So when we all talk,
okay,
we can
great.
see each other. So.
Terrific. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. And apropos of the title of our book tonight, Such a Fun Age, I hope we have a very fun conversation. So let me start by saying that when Such a Fun Age was published in 2019, it became a runaway hit, appearing on the New York Times bestseller list for 13 weeks. It's really easy to understand why. with its high energy plotting, jogging from one dramatic scene to another, and a cast of sharply etched characters facing off with snappy one-liners, not to mention the scene-stealing 3-year-old Briar. The novel grabs our attention with its rapid-fire pace, escalating tension, and dramatic confrontations, and all in the service of an issue that makes headlines every day: race in America. 2 years after its publication, the novel is even more timely. Its riveting opening scene mimics breaking news, including the confrontation between a Black student and a white security officer at Smith College, the siege on our Capitol, the call for racial justice by Black Lives Matter, and of course, the challenges of police responses. When we consider all of these events as a whole, or even as a continuum, the novel's connection to them becomes dramatically clear, especially with its core issue, such as the contested position of African Americans in relation to white privilege, and conversely, the white liberal effort to understand or achieve wokeness or to resist it. These examples, along with others in the last couple of years, make a difference in the way we read such a fun age. Even as we recognize that it's imaginative fiction, it cannot be divorced from the social, cultural, and historical realities that form its context and its plot. Having said that, let me emphasize that these realities do not erase the novel's entertainment value. In fact, I'd like to speak for just a moment about how we can assess the novel's combination of seriousness and entertainment. And so to begin, let's look at the novel's division between its first and second halves. The first half of the novel is written as satire, with its usual suspects who we recognize from Molière to Jane Austen to so many Hollywood and TV comedies. Lampooning the upper classes has been a perennial entertainment pastime for centuries. Like so many of these satires, the targets, interestingly enough, are typically women, who are written as symbols of consumerism gone wild, with their perfect hair, designer costumes, and unearned sense of well-being. In such a fun age, Alix, the protagonist, with her faux French pronunciation, Alix, is a prime suspect. By page 310, the last one of the novel, there is no doubt that she's been depicted as totally unaware that her self-conscious do-goodness is self-serving, that she wants to rescue her Black babysitter from being herself and transform her into Alix's image of an aspiring Black woman. I'd like to just read briefly a couple of examples of this satire of Alex and then her friends. So just to remind you, I'm going to begin with Breyer's third birthday party. Now, interestingly enough, on one page, there are two descriptions of birthday parties. The first one takes place in Manhattan, as Alex remembers it. She's been so sorry to leave Manhattan with its hipness and so forth and come to Philadelphia, which for her is practically primitive. So she remembers in Manhattan, children never opened presents at a party. Gifts were put in cabs and trunks or in a large clear plastic bag to be taken home with leftover cake. If you remembered, you could hide a few in a closet and save them for a plane ride distraction or for when your child peed in the proper place. Okay, compare that to Alex's response to Breyer's third-year birthday party in Philadelphia. In between a make-your-own Jell-O princess mold and a tiara that reeked of toxins and plastic, Alix retrieved her cell phone from her pocket to text her best friends. "Kill me," she typed. "I hate everyone here. Every present given to Briar was completely ridiculous, borderline sexist, or horribly cliched. The 3-year-old received a silver Fendi snowsuit, a white and pink little lady's tea set, an edible arrangement. Had they ordered this online? And a birthday cake scented Yankee candle with a Build-A-Bear gift card attached to the lid." So what's supposed to be a contrast between the Manhattan birthday party, where you never opened the gifts during the party, and Philadelphia, where you so crassly did. The interesting thing is that from the author's position, both birthday parties are ridiculous. Both are being made fun of. And one of the questions this raises is Alix aware of this? Okay. The satire continues throughout the novel, but its style shifts about halfway through to melodrama. Once Alix's Black babysitter, Emira, becomes seriously involved with Kelly, and Alix's fantasy of remodeling Emira turns to obsession, the plot thickens. Typical of melodrama, the emotional register and tension reach feverish pitch as Alix's fixation on Emira turns to horror when she feels compelled to read Emira's text messages and discovers that her Black babysitter is dating the man who had been Alix's very own high school sweetheart. The tension finally explodes, literally, when 3-year-old Briar vomits on the elegantly decorated Thanksgiving table. So, given all of that, I'd like to begin our discussion this evening with a question that this division in the novel raises. I'd be very interested to hear a variety of reactions, and so ask you, how do you feel about the novel Satire of Alex? And it also includes her friends. Tell us what you liked and why or why not. I think Marcy is muted.
Sorry. Deborah L., you have a hand up. Would you like to get us going?
Oh, sure. So I just finished the book this morning, and just before coming to our book discussion, I was on the Stryker Center, Cultural Center, with hearing an hour of Don Lemon talk about his new book. It is the fire, or we're in the fire, or something about that, talking about racism. And that was excellent. And so questions towards the end, which I think come from this book as well, is what is the work? What is the work that we have to do to change from making it a more perfect union for everybody and understanding our white privilege? It's interesting that he said it will, his perspective is that it will change with relationship and having relationships. and being honest and true in those relationships. And everyone needs to have a relationship with someone who doesn't look like them. So I'm just sharing that because I think that is important in looking at this book. Alex wanted a relationship, but she wasn't true. It wasn't true. It was more just, I don't know. She wanted it for her own prestige, I think, or her own, I don't know what the right word is, but it wasn't a relationship that really, she wanted to make, like you said, she wanted to fix Emira. So she never really wanted to understand her.
Sharon,
I don't think she ever really entered into it. Honestly, she had a purpose. So I don't think anything changes for really anybody in this book
Mhm.
except for Emira.
right? Sharon, did you want to comment on that?
Here's my issue, and this is why I think you were struggling, is that I think Alex was a very unlikable character from almost the get-go. She was all about facades. There wasn't, like, I never really believed that she wanted to be friends with Emira because I never felt like she was anybody other than somebody who just glossed on the surface. And I wish the author had made her slightly more likable because I never believed that she was well-intentioned at all, ever. Like the fact that she was like looking at her babysitter's phone, her critique of the birthday party, she was just like, I just, and then at the end, when you realize that, whoa, she really had huge issues with that doozy of a last chapter. To me, it was like, oh my gosh, it was just reinforcing why I didn't like her. And I just wish the author had made her slightly more likable, because I really feel if she was a little bit more likable, we could get into more of the nitty gritty of the race and the class relations. If she had made me believe that Alex ever was really well-intentioned, I feel like I would have had more to go with. But I just never, ever, ever felt that Alex was well-intentioned, ever. I don't know if it was just me. I don't know if other people felt the same way, but I just felt she was very unlikable.
So there's a number of comments in the chat that I'm going to read because I think they're relevant. We have someone that says it seems like, or Donna says it seemed like there was I'm going to put this in quote, white savior complex. Nikki says, Deborah, I agree that Alex was not genuine. I think that as part of the satire, she thought she could engineer a friendship. From Jessica to everyone, she wanted to use the relationship with Emira as a means of confirming her own superiority in a number of ways. Totally agree that she wasn't likable. And Cheryl says, Sharon, I don't disagree, but did you feel a bit sorry for Alex though? She went through major struggles early in her life. So that's a different thread. I saw one other person with a hand up, maybe before we shift. Judy, you want to comment?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sharon. She wasn't likable from the very beginning. Who calls a babysitter at 11 o'clock at night to take your child out, especially when Emira said she was at a party, she had been drinking. Why would she have her come and take her child? What kind of mother does that at 11 o'clock at night? I didn't like her from the start. And I agree with Sharon. If she was a little bit more likable, I could have bought into this relationship she was trying to have. But from the start, everything she did, she was just this snob. She wasn't likable. I just agree with you.
Okay, good. It makes me feel better
Yes,
because I just didn't like her.
I didn't either.
May I just add to that, because I think what you're saying is very interesting. If you think Alex is an unlikable character, I would assume, I'd like to assume that the author, Kylie Reed, talented as she is, a degree from the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is very hard to get into. So she's well prepared. She's very skilled. So she must, I would assume she knew that she was creating Alex as an unlikable character. If we grant her that assumption, what do you think she was trying to accomplish?
Just was writing in the chat that I think she had to make Alex show her white privilege. She had no clue when she was calling. We said we wouldn't call anybody at 11. That did not even cross her mind. That's privilege. And I think I agree. She had to make her that way. And that's how I read it. And I read as us not liking her is her not knowing how to relate to another person who is not like her, a person of color. She was asking all the time, what should I say? How should I say it? She had to be who she was, or we wouldn't get any, I don't know if I want to say lesson, we wouldn't get that lesson as being white. I don't know. That's what I think.
So RH says Alex was completely self-absorbed and transactional in all her relationships. She lived an unexamined life for all her wallowing in self-pity because she had denied the reality of her life and status. So does she, I mean, this is my question to the group, does that move her from unlikable to tragic? And does that create empathy in any way that you have this unexamined, transactional, shallow, snotty person?
I didn't have any empathy.
No.
At least for me, it didn't create a whole lot of empathy. But I'm going back to your question about if she was really trying to talk about the divide between white privilege and class and race. I'm going back to the question of why would she make Alex so unlikable? Where I just feel like if Alex had been slightly more, I'm thinking of the book White Fragility, which I read, and where they say that sort of liberal white people are sort of the worst at recognizing racism and moving forward to an anti-racist society. So I had that in mind when I was sort of reading this, but because I never felt like she was genuine and she was just so unlikable, I guess I didn't feel the tension there as much as I would have liked. But you're right. But what was the purpose of making her so unlikable? I would have rather seen myself more in it and have been like, oh God, like I'm this boy, does this hit home? But because she was so extreme and so unlikable, it was hard to see myself in that. Like you're able to more like in a book like White Fragility. So I am struggling with the notion of why did she have to make Alex so unlikable? And I don't know the answer to that.
Marcia with a hand up.
I just want to concur. I agree that I agree with everything you guys have said, that I think I did not like Alex either. And I think it's also curious. She was actually quite one-dimensional. There really, I don't remember a point in the plot where there's any kind of realization, redemption. And I agree that I didn't feel that her character was complex. And I think, it's not that I would assume that we all read that it's not that we want characters to have a little bit of likability in them, but we want them to be real. And yeah, I saw her as one-dimensional. If there had been a sliver of realization somewhere, something to create some tension, I think that I agree. I think that the book would have been stronger. But I did enjoy it very much.
So the character that I think of in contrast.
What would you say if just want to play devil's advocate for a minute? What would you say if the author, Kylie Reed, made Alex unlikable because that's her view of white America?
Is Kylie Reed white or black?
She's biracial.
She's biracial. So I have a question for you. First of all, I had a hard time getting into the book, but when I got to the very end, I was so glad that I read it. And I agree with Sharon, but I disagree because I think that Alex, the character of Alex was written to be, there was a purpose, there was an inference. And to like her or to dislike her, I think that there was a tension, and the tension immediately for me started when Emira was in the grocery store, and Alex is almost like the characters in The Help, when that's their life, that's how they lived, and they don't know any better, and and I'm wondering if we read the book in 2019. A lot has happened to us in our world since 2019. Would we be looking at it more consciously with the black, white, privilege kind of thing, which we're reading so much about today, like the white fragility and caste and whatever? Would we still be attuned and that sensitive to the white fragility and white privilege that we're using these terms today as a couple of years ago? And I think there was the great tension between Emira, and I applauded her when she walked out and stood up for herself at the end. She realized for a long time, and she finally realized her confidence in herself, and she walked out and she won in the end of the book. And I thought that was terrific. And I thought there was tension all along. I don't know, I could be wrong, but that's how I felt. If we were reading that book, I ask you, Phyllis, if we were reading that book or you were reading it in 2019, what would you have gotten out of it?
What would I have gotten out of it?
You have the same sensitivities as you would in 2019.
These issues have been, they've just escalated and erupted this last year in ways, but it's been building for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been African American writers who have been portraying the tensions and difficulties in American race relations for decades. This novel struck a chord at this particular time,
right,
because it does mimic stories that are making breaking news these days. But I would like to also return to a question about what kind of message do you think Kylie Reed is representing in her novel? What do you think she would like you to take away from the novel? Because let's assume that she knows that Alex is unlikable and that this creates an imbalance in the novel, because we need to then ask the question, is there anything about Emira that we don't like or disapprove of? So what do you think that the author would like us to take away in this imbalanced relationship that you've been talking about?
Well, a term that we've used recently in a lot of, at the museum for people that belong, you know, that are in the education department is cultural awareness. Be more just, you know, apply more justice, treat humanity in a just way. Don't be culturally aware in how you speak to people and treat people.
But don't you think that's something in a way that Kylie Reed is making fun of?
I don't know.
Alex is trying so hard to learn how to relate, to find the words in her mind to elevate Emira so that she can be something more than what she is. And so everything that she says to Emira comes across as the lesson that she has absorbed, but it's not working.
But I think it's very superficial.
Okay.
I'd like to hear other people's opinions. I don't think she's trying that hard. I think it's very superficial. I think that's her persona.
So I'd like to read something in the chat just so we can all respond from Nikki. I think self-reflection from the reader's point of view is a goal of the author. As I listened to the audiobook, I often heard things that were familiar thoughts to me as a white woman. Thank you for being authentic here. This is not easy sometimes. Especially thoughts Alex had about wanting a friendship with a person of color within my circle, but who seems out of reach. Now, I would not do what she did, but it did make me pause and think, do I ever act in this way? Do people of color experience me as privilege when I don't notice I'm acting or thinking from a position of privilege? The answer, I fear, is of course. This whole concept of people experiencing me, I think, is a really interesting and astute and authentic observation. So again, thank you for putting that in the chat.
I see Dina's had their hand up for a long time.
I just wanted to say there were a number of issues I had with Emira. She was a wonderful babysitter, but she was so questioning about her life. She didn't know where she was going, what she was doing, what her future held. But she was a graduate of college, and she still had no direction. And so I could not relate to either person in the book. I had a hard time. Now, I went to the University of Chicago, and my roommate was Black. And so, and we are still extremely close. She knows all about my life. I know all about her life. And so for me, this book didn't touch anything. I'm sorry. It was well written, but I didn't think it showed Emira's difficulties any more than it showed, but it did show a lot of Alex's difficulties.
I see Beverly with their hand up.
Well, I had sort of mixed feelings about this book because it went in so many different directions, and then the whole humor aspect. I thought the baby was just adorable. I mean, all the lines that came out of her mouth were like brilliant, and it really kind of softened the edges of everything else. But I don't remember knowing that much about Emira's life before she entered the story. I mean, they did talk about her appearance and that they were worried about her, but I don't remember anything else particularly coming out. But as far as her being insecure, I mean, considering she was a young Black woman, and what you see around you, I don't think that really engenders feelings of confidence. I think it's amazing that so many Black women do come out strong and powerful and able to really get ahead, because they have so many obstacles in their path. And I think Emira, had a lot of obstacles, and she wanted to believe these people because she really loved the little girl. Why is her name? Briar, right? Briar, yeah. she really loved the little girl and she wanted to stay with her. And I think the little girl, really made her feel important. I think that was important to her. And I love the comment comparing Alex to the women in the help. I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's a really good comparison. And I think if we would have read this book a few years ago, I don't know, it probably wouldn't have meant as much, because we've learned a lot since then, and we're, I think our eyes are more open now than they were a couple of years ago.
I have one question. Did anyone feel like, if you strip out the race piece and look at Emira, it's a coming of age story for someone who's trying to find themselves at 24 years old. The only experience that could be, if you took out the color, the grocery store, yes, but everything else beyond that could be of anyone of that age.
Right.
And does that make you look at the book differently?
I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think that one question that begs, and that's a very salient point, is the coming of age experience different for a young Black woman than it would be for a white woman? We can't forget that Alex's own coming of age experience was pretty complicated. She had 10 minutes of being wealthy. And then the family lost everything, and she's working, to support herself through college and so forth. Yet that feels like it becomes buried in the plot, because, as everyone has said, there are all these other qualities about Alex that are so unlikable. But I'm just wondering, if we think about Emira as a coming of age story, do you feel that at the end, when she walks out and leaves Alex, that that's an act of self-empowerment?
Yeah, totally. So a couple of things, like I have so much in my head now. So I want to answer the original question about why Alex is so unlikable after everybody talked. I think she made Alex so unlikable so we could actually see the divide better between Alex and Emira, and understand that it is a huge, huge divide. And even if we're better than Alex, it's still a huge divide that needs to be overcome somehow. So that's sort of like one thing I've gotten. The Emira coming of age, I was going to mention that too. I loved Emira. I really thought the moment where she got up and decided she wasn't going to be used anymore was amazing. And I really did think of it as sort of a coming of age story for her. But I also wanted to get back to another question about how we treat people. And I think one of the messages might be that we should not treat people as projects. Like nobody should be somebody else's project. And I think that was one of the big issues in the book, is that Alex looked at Emira as a project, and you should look at people as a project. They're human beings. And then back to Black women, I think the book showed that there's not necessarily a straight line path for all Black women. We looked at all of her friends, Emira's friends. One got this great job at, I don't remember, was it Apple or Microsoft, wherever she got promoted. And Emira was finding her own way. And I think at the end of the book, she ends up finding her own way. There's sort of epilogue at the end that she found her own way at the end. And it wasn't necessarily a straight path or a path that anybody else had planned for her, but she found her own way. So those were the three things that I just wanted to mention.
Do you think that the author gives Alex at any time a sense of self-revelation in which she understands that she has made Emira her project, to use your words?
I think that's my struggle with Alex. I think somebody said at the beginning that they didn't think that she was a dynamic character, that she was static. And I think so. There was no revelation. So I know people compared the book to The Help. You know the character that came to my mind as I was reading this? Did anybody read Little Fires Everywhere? And the movie, the TV was very different. Like the TV turned it into a racial issue, but the book was not. But the author in that book subtly made the suburban mom, little by little, into sort of a more villain-like character. And I love that, because at the end, I mean, you didn't love Mia, and you didn't love, forgetting the mom's name, but it was a very subtle thing. And as I was reading that book, I kept on thinking to myself, boy, I wish Alex had that subtlety a little bit more. But now I go back to the other point I made, is where I'm thinking maybe she really wanted to show how big the divide is. So she purposely made Alex the most extreme version of misfounded white privilege, thinking she's liberal that she possibly could, to show how big the divide is. That's my new theory. But that's the book I thought of while I was reading this. I was thinking of the main character in Little Fires Everywhere, and how her sort of villainy more subtly unfolded.
I think, Deborah, you have a hand up, and I noticed in the chat you also.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to share at the end. I was happy that Emira was content with who she was. I think she and wanting to stay the assistant. I can't remember, but it made me think how I kind of identify. There's like parts where I identify, and that was one, struggling to be, as smart as somebody else. I married a doctor, and he's so smart, and what am I doing? And, just a mother, and, but so in that way, it was like, there was always something to prove about who I was, but I feel like she had the confidence that she needed. And I was really happy with how she was written at the end.
Can we just, before we run out of time, I think it would be interesting to just shift the discussion a little bit to talk about the character of Kelly. He plays such a pivotal role in the novel. Now, for those who haven't read the novel, Kelly was Alex's high school sweetheart. He's now dating Emira. He has a penchant for Black friends, and he seems only to date Black women. And I would love to hear your response to that characterization.
Jane, I see a hand up. You're muted.
Yes, all right. Do you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I thought he was a not trustworthy and, in my opinion, unlikable. I didn't quite get the allure that either women had for him. I'm enjoying this conversation so much. I'm getting much more out of this book now than initially when I put the book down. I didn't care for her style of writing. I thought it sounded almost like a young adult novel. And getting back to Kelly, as I mentioned, I just didn't find him very likable.
What do you think? What point do you think Kylie Reid is trying to make? What message is she delivering through the character of Kelly?
Well, he had a different way of using African Americans to make himself feel better than Alex did. It was just a different, they were both equally in the wrong in completely different ways. And I thought she was trying to sort of illustrate that point, that you can't fix this by trying to make African Americans only your best friends and only date African American women. Like you can't go to that extreme either. You can't be totally phony like Alex, and you can't be totally, what did the word she used, fetish in the other direction. Like they were like two extremes, like neither way works. You have to find something else. I kind of wondered when I was reading about them, are there people out there who really do this? My guess is there probably are, otherwise she wouldn't have created a character like that. But maybe he was an extreme, just like Alex. Maybe she was trying to illustrate with that point that people shouldn't say, well, I'm not a racist because I have a Black best friend, right? Maybe he's that extreme version, just like Alex is that other extreme version. Maybe we got two polar views there.
So to apply the same criterion to our assessment of Kelly as we did to Alex, is there anything likable about Kelly?
I found it interesting. We were looking at Kelly through Alex's lens. So that word fetish was Alex's word. What about Emira's lens? What about her friends' lens? What about Kelly's own lens?
No, we don't get Kelly's point of view.
I didn't think he was totally unlikable. I don't feel like we got to know him particularly well. We only got to see him through Emira and Alex's eyes, but then Alex was not a true narrator, because the whole time we're believing this story about her senior year that she's still telling, even though she knows it's not true. So she's not a reliable narrator at all. That was sort of the reward at the end of the book, to find out that she wasn't reliable.
Beverly, I see a hand.
She seemed to be so ready to go back to her high school days, which I found sort of disturbing. Here she was, she had a career, she had a family, she had a lovely house, and yet she was so willing to go back to her high school days. I just thought that was rather disturbing. It made me think that she really wasn't very secure in herself or in her life. Even though she seemed to have a lot of material things, she still was not, I don't know, she was very immature. That was my thinking.
Now, the novel builds to this crescendo when we learn that Kelly was the love object of both Emira and Alex. In a way, this is a contrivance, an incredible coincidence. But again, Kylie Reed knew what she was doing with that. And so what do you think she would want us to take away from that contrivance? The fact that Kelly is the love object of both women protagonists.
Phyllis, would you repeat again what you're wanting us to think about?
The fact that Kelly is the love object of both Emira and Alex is a pretty big coincidence. And yet, but there must be some point about it, right? That the author is trying to make. And I'm just wondering what you thought that point might be.
Maybe I'll start since we had silence. Maybe he's Switzerland. He's not old, he's not young, right? Amira's young, Alex is old. Emira is Black, Alix is white. So maybe he's just something that sits in the middle, designed to show neutrality.
That's interesting. Is it a good neutrality?
We had silence, so I thought I'd jump in. I see Karen with a hand up and then Jane, so at least I got the conversation started. Go ahead.
And the silence, because he is a perplexing character.
Yeah,
Karen.
he's kind of bizarre, but I also think it shows how much Alix and Amir had in common that they were attracted to and attracted this unusual character, that it's something that despite all of their differences is a really tight connection.
That's a very interesting observation.
So what is it underneath each of them that appeals to Kelly and vice versa? I mean, they are both insecure in different ways. I don't know.
Is there someone else after Karen?
Well, I was just going to say why Kelly wasn't really neutral, because he was telling Emira not to work for Alex. So he had his own kind of agenda, So I don't know. I guess that's all from me.
A couple of interesting comments in the chat. Joan said, I found Kelly to believable. I don't criticize his interest in the other. And then Cheryl said, perhaps a savior complex for Kelly. Interesting.
A different kind of savior complex than Alex.
So I see Helen has their hand up, and then I think Marcia and Judy also wanted to speak up.
So if you go back to the very beginning of the book, if I recall correctly, Kelly just happened, quote unquote, to be in the store where Emira was stopped. He heard the story of what she was doing there. He heard the story of this child. He heard the story of who the employer was. Maybe he had some kind of an ulterior motive that drove him.
Is that ever revealed or explained in the novel?
Well, I didn't say it was. I just thought it was an interesting coincidence.
What I thought was interesting about it is how aggressive he was about filming it. And I'm wondering if the point she was trying to make, oh, it's all well and good for you people to film what's going on, but how are you going to stop it? He didn't do anything to stop it. And we're in an age now where all of these incidents are being filmed by other people. And on one hand, it reveals what's going on in society, but maybe you need to take it a step further and help solve the problem rather than just be a spectator on the outside filming it.
That's a fascinating point, because he's safe behind his cell phone.
Right.
He's created this nice fence. So he's sort of kind of involved, but not really. He's not taking any risks.
But yet he thinks he's doing this great thing, right? Again, he and Alex sort of the opposite side of, oh, I'm so great, when they're maybe not so great.
So Phyllis, this has been an amazing discussion. We have about 5 minutes left. So I didn't know if you had a final question or a way you wanted to wrap this with the group, but I wanted to give you a time warning.
Okay, thank you. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I think we've gotten into the problem of the challenge of writing fiction about race relations that are so real. That, as I said at the beginning, it's breaking news every single day. And then to fictionalize it, to make some kind of argument or express a position, is in itself a huge risk. On the one hand, I think Kylie Reed knows that there will be a lot of white liberal readers who will lap this up because they want to be involved. They want to do the right thing. And reading this novel, in a sense, is doing the right thing. But then one wonders about the lasting effects of that. Is reading the novel similar to Kelly hiding behind his cell phone and only taking a picture of what happened? Do you think we're in the same kind of position? We're reading this novel, we can feel good about reading about race relations, but where do we go from here?
It's true.
Any comments? All right, well, I want to thank Phyllis and our group. Many of you have become familiar faces at these events, and I relish seeing you every month. Thank you for Michelle for helping. I do want to remind everyone our next book is, let me get my notes here, Anti-Semitism Here and Now by Deborah Lipstadt. Really interesting book where she writes, it's a series of letters debating what's going on in the world as it relates to anti-Semitism. So the description says over the last decade, there's been a noticeable uptick in anti-Semitic rhetoric and the incidents by left-wing groups targeting Jewish students and Jewish organizations on American college campuses, and the reemergence of white national movement in America, complete with Nazi slogans, imageries. This is not new to any of us. In a series of letters to an imagined college student and imagined colleague, both of whom are perplexed by this resurgence, acclaimed historian Deborah Lipstadt gives us her own superbly reasoned, brilliantly argued, and certain to be controversial responses to these troubling questions. So that is taking place April 20th at 7. So we invite you to that and to our next program, which is on Thursday, which is the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, prison and the Nelson Mandela capture site. So in this program, you'll be invited to view Robben Island before the program. And then during the program, Christopher Till, the executive director of the Apartheid Museum and the Nelson Mandela capture site, will share his insights about the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. So both programs are sure to be fascinating, and I hope you can join us. We'll hang out here. Oh, Michelle is going to put a survey in the chat. So if you can fill that out, that would be great. We always look to learn from you and make these better. And we'll hang out for another 5 minutes if anyone has a question or comment and wants to stay on. But with that, thank you for coming and have a lovely evening.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the author of the book?
Oh yeah, Deborah, let me spell it for you. Lipstadt, Lipstadt, and I'll give a shameless plug. It's for sale in our museum book shop, and you can order it off of the Legacy Shop Shopify. And if you get our newsletters, there's a link at the bottom of every newsletter to get to the bookshop.
We have a page on our website that has our upcoming book clubs, so I will drop that in the chat as well so everyone can see. You can also buy those books from our gift shop on that page as well.
Many thanks.
Anyone with a final question or comment?
I'm going to say this book reminded me of Emma, Jane Austen's Emma.
Absolutely.
Where Emma wanted her friend to marry the clergyman, and Emma desperately wanted to marry the farmer, loved his sisters, loved the farmer, and Emma was absolutely positive that she had to marry the clergyman, and how she got involved in her life. And in some ways, there's a lot of similarities, but it's a class difference versus a race difference.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great observation. And you know, there was a contemporary Hollywood movie adaptation of Emma, and the title was Clueless.
Ah, okay, that fit.
Jane? Bye. Are you waving bye? Or are you saying you have a comment? You're waving goodbye. Goodbye. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm gonna end this. I don't seem to have any more comments. We appreciate your time and being with us tonight.
Thank you all for coming.